Good morning, everyone. Hello, hello. This morning we were talking about how to be taken seriously at work. This is something that I get a lot of questions about, and frankly, this is something that a lot of people are searching for on YouTube quite a bit, so I thought it was time to sit down and have a little chat about it. Not being taken seriously at work can be really frustrating, and I know I experienced this quite a bit, especially early in my career. And I also have folks that I've coached through this who get pretty frustrated about it as well. Because when you're not being taken seriously at work, it feels like everybody's talking over you. It feels like your ideas aren't being taken seriously. And it really starts to feel like you don't have any influence. And so, like I said, that can be really, really frustrating. And it happens for a number of reasons. Not all of them are in your control. For example, when I first moved to Texas from California, part of why I wasn't taken seriously was just because I was the youngest person. You can't control that. And I was the only woman in a room full of men. And you just kind of have to prove yourself, but you can't control those circumstances. But there's a lot that you can control. And that's the good news. There's a lot that you can do to affect this. So let's start off by talking about why people aren't taken seriously in the workplace sometimes, and that'll help explain some of the tips that we're about to get into as well. So, a lot of times people aren't taken seriously because they don't understand the office norms and the office dynamics. And so they don't know how to show up within those norms and dynamics. And when that happens, the people on the other side of the table, just get this feeling of differentness and just feeling like, that person isn't all that credible because they don't fit in. Basically, they don't fit into how we do things around here. And in any kind of social group, that's always a thing, is, fit in with how we do things. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then also, a lot of times people aren't taken seriously because they're not demonstrating that they take themselves seriously. And so that really gives off the vibe of, why would I take you seriously if you're not doing it yourself? And considering that my audience is on YouTube, I'm going to use a YouTube example. It would be just like, when I say taking yourself seriously, it would be just like if you're watching a YouTuber and they were doing scripted videos, not alive. So I use scripted videos as an example, and they didn't bother having any sort of like outline or narrative thread, and they didn't have professionally produced thumbnails, or they didn't even attempt to edit it. When you see that on YouTube, you're like, oh, they're not taking it seriously. And so you don't either. And it's the same thing at work. If you're working with somebody who doesn't look like they take themselves seriously, you're just not going to react well to that. Basically, that's how it is. And then the other reason people aren't taken seriously is just lack of confidence in their own communication. So there's certain things people do that undermine the confidence within their own communication. So people, again, don't take their communication seriously. Most of these things are fixable. Like I said, there's certain things that there's not much you can do anything about, but for the most part, there's a lot you can do to affect how people perceive you and then therefore respond and react to you in the workplace. So let's talk about some of the easy ones first. The first one is demonstrate that you've mastered the basics. Because again, if people don't think that you've mastered the basics, they're not going to listen to anything you say, right? So when we talk about work and we say, well, what does it mean to master the basics? One of the first things is, this is going to sound annoying, but being on time. Like, people will respect you if you're on time, they won't respect you if you're not. And I feel like people hear this so much and they kind of get really like defensive about it and tune it out. I know a lot of people who are constantly late and they get really pissy when people bring it up. And I'm like, you're the one who's late, you know? Well, that is the attitude, right? When you're in a professional context, a basic professional skill is time management and promptitude. And that's being on time to work, that's being on time to meetings, that's demonstrating a respect for other people's time. So yeah, people won't take you seriously if they think that you can't even do the basics of managing your own time. That really undermines your credibility in all other areas. It's a really hard one to overcome. So especially if you're a little earlier in your career, or if you're later in your career, this is a really good self-check. It does undermine your credibility to not be able to manage your own time. So be on time. It's frankly, it's basic respect at work. And if you're not showing that basic respect, people will not respect you either. And the other one is dressing for your industry. And so this is a big one. And I think that you don't have to spend a ton of money, but you do need to understand what the industry norms are and dress towards that. For example, if you work in Silicon Valley, there's this huge joke that it's been jeans and hoodies for a long time, but it's true. It was jeans and hoodies. And if you showed up in a three-piece suit, you weren't taken kind of seriously as a tech bro in Silicon Valley. People would think you were like a salesman or a suit or something. So dressing for the industry doesn't always mean dressing up, and it doesn't mean necessarily dressing better. It means dressing appropriately, like dressing like the other people you work with. If you're working with architects and they wear, I don't know what architects wear, but I'm going to say button up shirts and jeans, then that's how you need to dress. And yes, there's a thing when you're trying to get promoted that you want to dress for the next level up. But first, I would say, again, master the basics, right, of dressing for the industry that you work in. So if you're a developer, there's like a certain way that developers dress. If you work in finance, there's like a finance outfit. Just really look around you and see what the norm is and just try and match that. And these are subconscious cues that you're sending through your clothing that you are like them and that you get them. And then when they get those subconscious cues, then they will listen to you at least a little bit more because they feel like you're one of them. But if you're always othering yourself with how you dress, and again, that is something you can control, you're not going to get that basic, level of being taken seriously and that basic level of credibility. So again, dress for the industry that you work in and look at your peers and quickly adjust. If you show up the first couple weeks and you're dressed like really bizarrely, as long as you change it, it's fine. But if you keep dressing like an outsider, they're going to treat you like an outsider. All right. And then the next one is knowing how to behave in meetings. That's another way to quickly gain basic credibility is when you're in meetings, understand the norms of that meeting and how everybody behaves. If it's a status meeting, do people wait to get called on? If they're giving their status updates to their boss or to the team, do they say it in a certain format? Do people wait until the end to ask questions? So really pay attention to the flow of the meetings you're in and what the norms of behavior are in that meeting. And this goes back to what we talked about not understanding office norms and office dynamics. One of the quickest ways to alienate yourself is to be the weirdo in the meeting, going off topic, speaking at the wrong time. Going off topic is a huge one because it really shows that you don't know what's going on. So if you look like you don't know what's going on in a meeting, why should anyone listen to what you say? That's really how people in the meeting feel. And when you have been in a certain situation for long enough and you're on the other side, you'll get it too, because you'll see so many people coming in and out. And it's frankly really disruptive when somebody doesn't understand the norms and the flow of the meeting. It disrupts the whole meeting. So not only are you not taken seriously, it's the opposite. It's really genuinely undermining your image and inspiring negative confidence, not just a lack of confidence. So I'd say pay particular attention to meeting norms and how you show up in these meetings, and always, always, always stay on topic. Do not be the guy that's being the devil's advocate when that's not the time for that, or bringing up random crap because it's on the top of your head. And a lot of us have ADHD. Like, I'm not going to lie, I am an ADHD girly, right? And I am impulsive and I like to just talk about what I want to talk about. So I get it. But when you're in these meetings, just bring your notepad. And when you have these like thoughts and ideas that pop up, write them down and sit with it for a minute and make sure that it is appropriate to bring it up. Don't just say it because you're worried you'll forget it later. I see people do this all the time. And when I'm coaching people through this, that is one of the things that they say is, well, I didn't want to forget it. So I just like blurted it out. And I'm like, yeah, we can tell. But also that does undermine people's confidence in you because they think then you also can't self-manage, right? Like, not only do you not understand the norms of the meeting, but you can't self-regulate and self-manage at all. So like I said, bring the notepad and jot the ideas down so you don't lose them, but don't make it other people's problem. That's really one of my biggest pieces of advice for work in general is whatever issues you're dealing with are fine, but just don't inflict them on everybody else. So that's one of my biggest tips over there. And do not overuse slang. Like, it's okay to use a little bit of slang, even generational slang, and that shows your personality and individuality. But where people go wrong is that they assume that their slang is actually more widespread than it is. And an example of that is I am a gamer. And so there's certain gamer words. And if I've already established credibility, I might get away with using more of them at work. But also, people aren't going to necessarily understand what I mean. And generational slang is the same way. A lot of your Gen X or millennial coworkers aren't going to understand what you're saying. And the whole point of communication is to be understood, right? Not only will they not understand it, even if they do, it still undermines your credibility. It makes you look like an unserious person if you're in a professional setting using unprofessional language. This goes back to it looks like you don't take yourself seriously. So, an example would be your boss calls you and says, "Hey, I really want to assign you this juicy project. Do you think you're up for it?" And you say, "Bet." Like, that's just not an appropriate way to respond. Or somebody's asking you, "How's that assignment going? I know that it was a little bit big. Are you doing okay with it?" And you're like, "Yeah, it's chill." It doesn't seem like you're taking the work seriously or yourself. And so, again, it's undermining it. So what you want to do is watch your language and make sure that you're using the same verbiage as your coworkers so that they will, I'm just going to say it again, feel like you are more like them and that you understand the office norms and the dynamics of the office and that you are fitting into it, because then they will just subconsciously take you more seriously, which is the whole point of this, right? You just want to be taken more seriously. So I'm not making fun of anybody. I'm not beating up on anybody for what you're doing or not doing. I'm just telling you how to navigate this. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry. But if you try it, you'll be surprised. Leave it at that. Okay, the next one is so important, which is to just honestly do quality work. Like, do quality work and people will take you seriously. I see a lot of people who are switching careers, switching industries, new to a specific company or even early career, who kind of flail around and they don't understand why they're not being respected. But I'm like, hey, you're new to whatever the situation is, the best thing you can do is put your head down and get your work done. People always want to get involved in like the politics or, do all this other like higher tier stuff when I'm like, hey, this goes back to mastering the basics. Do a good job. And that is a really strong foundation for people taking you seriously. Do quality work. And I'm going to use the YouTube example again. Like, if you've got a YouTuber who isn't putting any care into the quality of their videos, then the audience tends to not take them seriously. So quality does matter. And at work, the people who do quality work, even if they don't do a lot of the other pieces of the social game at work, are taken seriously because of the quality of their work. That's huge. So I'd say that if we were building a table here, doing quality work is three of the legs and possibly the surface of that table. I cannot emphasize enough that one of the best ways to be taken seriously at work is to make sure that your work is good, because it shows that you take it seriously. And you can see a theme here. If you take yourself seriously and if you take your work seriously, people are more likely to take you seriously. All right, I'm going to take a sip of my coffee really quick. I don't know if everybody knows, but today is the first red cup day at Starbucks. So I've got this cute little holiday cup for my latte. All right, I'm going to go back to language again, because not only should you watch your slang, but one of the best ways to be taken seriously is to use the same lingo or jargon as the industry you're in. So, and the industry may not just be like healthcare or aviation or telecom. Yes, they all have their specific lingos and jargon, but also industry, like if you're a project manager or a product manager, all of these kind of job types and all of these job industries have their own language. And it's really important to speak that language, to be understood, of course, but also to be taken seriously. So if I'm working with a project manager and they don't know what a KPI is, I don't trust them. Like, why would I take their opinion on anything if they don't know the basics of their own job? That's the mindset. Oh, yes, Jeremy celebrating the red cups. Yes, it's Red Cup Day. Thank you, Jeremy, for the comment. But yeah, so if they don't know the basics of their job, of course nobody's going to take them seriously. That's the way it is. And so one of the best things you can do to establish credibility to be taken seriously is to know the language for your job type and industry and make sure you're using the lingo and the jargon correctly. If you're not sure, don't use it, because it actually looks pretty bad to use it incorrectly. I'll say that. So just make sure that you are definitely using the same lingo and jargon as your coworkers, as your clients. And that's one of the best ways to credentialize yourself. And I'm going to say that as a consultant, one of the things you have to do when you meet new clients is you have to quickly credentialize yourself. You have to quickly gain their trust. You have to quickly, make sure that they can trust you and take you seriously. And one of the ways you do that is to use the lingo and the jargon of your industry and theirs. They just innately trust you after that. Give me just a second. So definitely keep an eye on that and just know that it is one of the best ways, not just to gain credibility, but to gain it quickly, is to make sure you're using that lingo and that jargon, again, for both your industry and theirs. All right, time for another sip from the red cup. And while I'm taking a drink, if you guys have any questions so far, if there's anything I've said of any of these points that don't make sense, let me know. Or if you have a question about something else about being taken seriously, go ahead and drop it into chat. I don't mind if you guys do that while I'm talking either. I can take a break and get to it after I finish my point. It does not throw me off. So feel free to just put anything in chat at any time, and I'm good with that. The other thing that it does when you're using the same language as people, and again, I mean lingo and jargon language, not literal language, is it reduces friction. And what you want to do, especially when you're building up your reputation in your career and in your company, you want as little friction as possible. You want a frictionless experience for the people around you. And having seamless communication is one of the best ways to reduce or remove friction. And people remember good experiences about you. So that's another benefit of this, is that you get that kind of instant credibility and being taken seriously, but you also have a broader impact of having this much smoother and frictionless experience to help build your credibility long term as well. Another thing that really helps with being taken seriously is asking thoughtful questions. And I mean thoughtful questions, not superficial questions, but really engaged questions that show that you're paying attention to whatever it is that's being discussed, whether it's in a meeting or whether it's about a project. But if you're asking thoughtful questions, it shows that you are paying attention, that you understand what's going on, and that you're actually thinking about the steps it would take to do that. So this goes back to be taken seriously by taking things seriously, by showing that you take it seriously. So if you're asking thoughtful questions, it really demonstrates that you're taking yourself and the work seriously. And so the better your questions are and the more thought you put into them, the more credibility is granted to you as somebody who genuinely cares about the work. And that's another thing we hear all the time, right? Is that certain people seem like they just don't care. So asking thoughtful questions is one of the best ways to demonstrate you care. And demonstrating you care leads to being taken seriously. So definitely really think about the questions you're asking and make sure that you're not asking superficial or even off topic questions. Like we talked about in meetings, don't go off topic. Same thing's true of questions in any setting. Don't, make sure they're on topic. But also, the more thoughtful and insightful your question is, the more credibility you're building. And credibility is all about being taken seriously. It's the key to being taken seriously. So, great way to build up your credibility. Thoughtful, meaningful questions. And don't, I'm just going to emphasize that again. Do not ask random scattershot questions so that you look like you're participating. It's a waste of time and it does not build your credibility. It undermines it and it's frankly annoys everybody. So make sure they're genuinely thoughtful questions. Okay. Oh, this is good. Because one of the examples we gave about what it looks like to not be taken seriously is that nobody listens to your ideas. I hear this one a lot. I hear this one from people I'm coaching when I'm on panels. People ask about this. They'll tell me, Gabby, nobody's taking my ideas seriously. I mention my ideas and nobody listens. And after decades of doing this, I'm like, are you, how are you pitching that idea? That's really usually the problem, is your delivery of the idea. So let's talk about that. First, make sure it's an actual serious idea. So this goes back to being on topic and being thoughtful. Put those two thoughts together for this one. When you're pitching an idea, make sure that it is a serious idea, on topic, well thought out. I'm going to use an example. I was brainstorming with a friend and they were like, "Oh, we should put Easter eggs in that." And I'm like, "Yeah, like what kind of Easter eggs?" And they're like, "Well, I don't know, but I really like Easter eggs. I think it's fun that Taylor Swift has Easter eggs in her songs." I'm like, "Yep, me too. But what's the idea?" Right? Like that's kind of like having the intention of an idea and not an idea itself. Like I'm not saying an idea has to have a fully executable plan, but it should be like one step away from being able to develop a fully executable plan. So, an Easter egg idea that is more concrete might be in every video, let's have a secret, a little figurine. I have these Funko Pops. So, an actual like fleshed out idea might be put a different one of those in every video. That's an Easter egg idea, but that's the idea is something concrete, something more specific, right? And that is what I'm seeing a lot of times is that when people are pitching an idea and then they're complaining that their idea isn't being taken seriously, it's not a great idea. And by not great, I mean it's not thoughtful in the sense of it actually helps do anything. What's the benefit of doing it? And it's not a good idea in the sense that it's not like fleshed out or actionable in any way. And then people get really frustrated. And they're like, well, I'm being creative and I'm innovating. And I'm like, yeah, you're actually not. Like, there's no there. Like, there's nothing for people to grab onto. So that's the pitch part of it. So if you're actually pitching an idea, the idea should have some thought in it. And then when you're pitching it, it needs to be more concrete than let's just have Easter eggs. It needs to be something more specific than that and actionable. And they also need to be able to describe the frequency, the cost of doing it, and what's the benefit. And the cost of doing it, like you're like, Gabby, I'm pitching an idea and you want me to have a whole proposal? No, but you should have an idea of like what it would take to do that. Is it a low lift? Like, hey, I can go grab one of these figurines out of my collectibles room, or do we have to buy a new one every week? You know what I mean? Like you have to have some idea of what it would take to do it, even if you don't have numbers when you're initially like brainstorming it. And then, like I said, you need to know what the benefit is. And the benefit can be building community and it will take about this long for people to notice it. But yeah, when you're first like throwing ideas out there, if you want people to be able to grab onto them, you need to give them enough to sink their teeth into. And if you don't, your ideas will not be taken seriously because it's either a shitty idea or it's poorly pitched. Nobody's going to waste their time trying to figure out what the hell you're talking about when you're throwing it out there. So if you're throwing your ideas out and that's what happens, they just like die on the vine, it's one of those two things and usually both. So if you guys have ideas you've been trying to pitch to people, and you want some help with that, feel free to drop that in chat or even just reach out to me. Like if you're a subscriber of the channel and you want to message me or something, I think our contact information is in there. Please feel free. This is an interesting one and I'd love to help people with it because I know how frustrating it is to feel like you're not being listened to. And the problem is if you don't know why, just like anything else, if you don't have enough information to understand why that's happening, you're going to make up your own ideas about why it's happening. And you might be like, oh, it's because I'm the new girl, or oh, it's because of this. But yeah, thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy just said in chat, having a rough idea of cost for ideas is so important, even if it's just directional. That's right. Because it gives people an understanding of, is it even worth talking about this? Right. Like another idea, like we were starting a new business, and another idea might be like, oh, let's make sure we go to one conference a week. Whoa, how much is that? You know what I mean? Like to me, it's like, hey, let's set aside X amount of dollars a week for doing these kinds of activities that give us this benefit. But if you're brainstorming and you're like, oh, I want to travel every week, yeah, you've got to have an idea of what that might cost in order to have a really realistic conversation about the idea itself. And like I said, if you don't, the people in the room aren't going to bother asking you questions or digging into it. Because you might be saying, well, Gabby, why don't they ask me these questions? Why should they? Like you haven't given them enough to care so that they would ask the questions. And that may sound harsh, but it's true. And like I said, when you're the person who gets 50 people telling them stuff all the time. Like, you have to get their attention. You know what I mean? Like, and that's a great way to get their attention is to make sure it's well thought out, make sure you have a directional or representative idea of what would even go into the cost, like what factors and what the benefit is, and be able to clearly articulate the idea itself. So I'll do more videos, and probably I'm even going to create a worksheet to help people through pitching ideas, because I think that you guys are smart, right? Like, I do think that you probably have some good seeds of ideas, and you just need to be presenting them in meetings in a way that people will want to know more about them. That's how it is a pitch. Even if it's in a brainstorming meeting, it's still a pitch, right? You still have to get their interest. All right. And when. Oh, that was my other note. Not just know how to pitch them, but know when. When is the appropriate time to bring up these ideas? I can tell you when not in a status meeting. So I say that because there's a lot of times where I'm in a room full of people and we're going around within a specific agenda. And then somebody like comes up with this like off the wall idea. And again, it really undermines the idea because it makes them look like they don't understand the office norms and dynamics. And also it's wasting everybody's time. So you have to make sure that you know when it's appropriate to be throwing ideas out there. If you're in a collaboration session, if you're in a brainstorming session, or sometimes team meetings are better than a statusy meeting. And if your boss, their team meetings are only statusy meeting and there's no room for additional agenda items, then schedule a one-on-one. But the other thing you can do is if you have an idea offline, you can ask for that to be added as an agenda item ahead of time so that someone can then, make space for that conversation. Okay, Jeremy's asking, if you do pitch an idea at the wrong time, what's a good way to rectify the mistake in the moment? So let's say that you're in a meeting and, like we talked about earlier, you get really excited and you just kind of blurt it out. Read the room, right? You'll know it's the wrong time by people's reactions. They're going to be like, or just kind of not latching onto it. And, if you have that feeling of, oh goodness, this was just the wrong time, just like, so sorry. Let's take that offline and circle back. I do think that there's something there, but I realize that we don't have enough time to address that in this meeting. So we're going to take that offline and just kind of bring that up yourself so that the facilitator doesn't have to say that to you. That shows that you have situational awareness and that you have an understanding of the norms of the meeting. And again, it's human to be impulsive. I work with very senior people who still blurt out random crap all the time. So it's not like a career ender. And Jeremy, that's a great question because, again, if you do have that situational awareness to notice that you've done this and it's just like a mood killer or falling flat, then definitely just say, oh my gosh. Well, you don't have to say, oh my gosh, use your own personality, in your own words, but just be like, you know what? I think that idea is going to take more time than we have in this meeting. So let's go ahead and take it offline and we can circle back. So I know, buzzword. But yeah, great question, Jeremy. Thank you for asking that. All right. Anything else about idea pitching before we move on to the next one? Timing is so important. And sometimes if you're not used to pitching ideas, just keep doing them in one-on-ones. Because then you've got dedicated time and more room for exploration. And then you can also be testing and refining your pitch with your boss or your mentor in those one-on-ones before you're doing it in a whole room. And they can often give you feedback. And that's another great idea is that after you're having these conversations, then offline, ask for some feedback. Just be like, hey, how did that go? What did you think of that? I love open-ended questions like that. Like, how did that go? Or what did you think of that? Because then people can respond with whatever's on their minds. I do appreciate specific feedback questions, but sometimes that kind of opening the door for them allows them to tell you if it's on their mind, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. The final one for how to be taken seriously at work is to work on other parts of your communication. So we talked about lingo, we talked about staying on topic, we talked about not using slang, but other parts of your communication are just as important and sometimes even more. And what I mean by that is you need to be able to articulate your idea with confidence. And I don't mean arrogance, right? Like that's a big thing for me is that confidence isn't arrogance, but at least have the confidence to speak firmly. Like we can't all control our voices. My voice is a little scratchy. That's fine. But I'm still speaking from my chest. So have like strength in your voice as much as you can. And don't undermine what you're saying with your actual word usage. A lot of times people are over qualifying, well, it's just an idea, or I had a thought, or maybe this isn't any good. Like people are already shooting themselves in the foot before they even said the thing they're trying to say. Don't do that. And so speaking with confidence, like I said, it's not always actively projecting the confidence. It's speaking clearly and not using words and phrases that undermine your message and undermine yourself. Because if you're doing that, this goes back to taking yourself seriously. If you don't believe in your idea, and if you're demonstrating that you don't believe in your idea while you're pitching your idea, why would anybody else? They won't. And it's not just your ideas, like, you need to be speaking like this, like, all the time, and this goes into your body language too and your nonverbals, right? Like, you can tell when I'm speaking, I'm, like, looking at you, I'm making eye contact, I'm, like, leaning in at appropriate times, right? What I'm not doing is talking, like, hunched over and, like, scribbling in my notepad, you know what I mean? Those things don't project confidence. So when you're speaking, always face forward, eyes front, make sure you're making eye contact with somebody, and that's also good for reading the room, by the way, is making sure that you're looking at somebody, but in your peripheral vision, you can kinda see how things are landing with people, so you can adjust your message if it's not landing well. What you don't wanna do is double down and start, like, talking faster or, like, word vomiting when you know it's not landing. That's worse. So just pay attention to that. But like I said, just pay attention to your body language and your own nonverbal cues when you're speaking, and don't use language that undermines your message. Because again, if you don't appear confident, people will not be confident in you and they just won't take you seriously. So I'm going to pause right there. Is there anything else that you want to know about communication and how it can impact your message and being taken seriously? Or is there anything I haven't covered? Have you had a situation where you're not being taken seriously and you don't feel like it fits into any of these things? I'd love to hear from you. So drop some stories in the chat or drop some questions in the chat because I'd love to continue talking about this. And I would really like to know the experiences people are having. This is what I've observed. This is what I went through in parts of my career, and this is what I've observed and coached people through. And ideally, you do have trusted mentors and peers where if you're doing all these things and your ideas still aren't landing, you can maybe talk to people why, and maybe ask people, hey, I feel like I'm not being taken seriously in that meeting, and I feel like I'm doing all the right things. Why do you think I'm not being taken seriously? And see what they say. I think that having the courage to ask is so important because I think that if you do all of my tips, you will be taken seriously. I genuinely believe that. But I'm not there with you in the office. I don't know. You could be doing something else, cuckoo bananas that I can't see and I can't tell you what else might be going on. But if you do have that trusted mentor or trusted peers or you can ask your manager, and also, you might describe something to them that you're interpreting as not being taken seriously, and they might have some insights that it's actually something else. So, all the tips I've given so far on this live will help you get taken more seriously at work, but there's nothing that replaces actual real conversations and real feedback with people who work with you. Because sometimes, like I said, you might be interpreting something as people not taking you seriously, and it's completely different. An example of that is um, I had some new consultants who were joining the team at the client, and the client had a very stressful confidential situation going on that I could not disclose to the new consultants. But I would let them know the client is going to be a little distracted. So she's trying to be present for us in these meetings, but she's just a little distracted. And they would come to me and say, I feel like the client's not listening to me. I feel like the client doesn't take us seriously. She doesn't like us. She doesn't care about our project. I used to hear that all the time. She doesn't care about our project. And I'm like, no, she cares very much. She's so busy and she's making time to be here. So the behaviors you're interpreting that way, they really are this other thing. And even though I told them that once, they're human. They've got insecurities. The fact that they came and raised it to me so I could really reassure them, no, she does care. There's just this other stuff going on that I can't tell you about, but please believe me when I say it's very, very serious. And the fact that we're getting her time is a gift, frankly. So they were just misreading the situation. And it happens all the time. We are only as good as our own experiences in terms of interpreting why things are happening. There is so much power in asking and having the confidence to say, this is what I'm observing, and I'm not sure I'm reading it right. What's going on? I think I'm not being taken seriously. And it might be, no, the entire executive team is trying not to get fired right now. So they may not be taking you seriously because they can't take anything seriously because they're trying not to get fired. That's a thing that happens. Honestly, that's real life. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the live this morning. I hope you enjoyed having coffee with me and doing a little bit of work chat. If you like the morning times, I'd love to know. YouTube is telling me that there's a lot of people online in the morning, which I'm like, do people like watch YouTube before they go to work? I don't know. Maybe it's not just all US people, but I'd love to know if you like morning chats because I can do more coffee talks if that makes sense for everybody. Thank you all so much. And if there's anything else you want to know about not being taken seriously, please reach out to me and I can do another live or a full video about it. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.